Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Manuel Nordhoff.
And I'm Tall August.
And we present today a case for website design localization. We will share our findings from a large-scale design comparison across 44 countries and present our tool Juxtapose, which you can use to explore our dataset. Right. Website localization translates and adapts content for a specific regional audience. For example, here you see the US Google search results for Leonardo da Vinci, and localization alters the content for Russia like this. Website design localization goes a step further and adapts the layout and stylistic elements to regional preferences. On the left, you see the Coca-Cola website for Brazil, and on the right, the version for South Korea. Besides the corporate identity, those websites look completely different. When thinking about design localization, it is important to know how website design differs around the world. Prior studies have compared website designs across countries, but the results were ambiguous. Marcus and Gold in 2000 found diversity when looking at selective samples from around the world. And Callahan in 2005 claimed similarity when looking at 160 university websites. 2012, Goyal again found diversity when looking at governmental websites from 5 countries. So each of these studies were based on a rather small sample size. And we thought what was needed is a large-scale global website design comparison. We wanted to know, how does the visual design of the most popular websites actually differ between countries?
So, for our study, we collected the top 2,000 most popular URLs from 44 countries, based on the Alexa top site rankings. This gave us around 80,000 screenshots after filtering adult content. We used computer vision based on the OpenCV library to decompose the screenshots into quantifiable design metrics. As you can see from the image, these computer vision techniques break down a website screenshot into metrics like number of image areas, number of text areas, and ratio between white space and content elements. Based on prior work, we combine these metrics into models for perceived colorfulness and visual complexity, which have in the past been shown to be predictors of visual appeal. These metrics allowed us to conduct high-level analyses of the design differences between countries without human bias, since all of our metrics were derived computationally. So to start, the colorfulness model. The colorfulness model is scored on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being not very colorful at all, and 10 being very colorful. On the left is an example of a website with high colorfulness. On the right is an example of a website with high colorfulness, and on the left, an example of a website with low colorfulness. Comparing the average colorfulness scores of website designs between countries, we found statistically significant differences. Top websites in China, for example, are on average more colorful when compared to the United States. And this difference in colorfulness can actually lead to differences in visual appeal. You can see this difference here with an example of a website around the average colorfulness score for the United States on the right, and a website around the average colorfulness score for China on the left. Oh. Okay, great. Whew. I know. Thank you, Manuel. Okay. The American websites exhibit lighter colors and less imagery compared to the Chinese website. The perceived colorfulness model is made up of lots of submetrics, and these metrics actually provide even more exciting and visually apparent differences than the model scores. So one of the most observable submetrics of colorfulness is saturation, which indicates how much color each pixel of an image has. So in looking at saturation across countries, we again found differences. For example, Brazilian websites on the left show stronger colors compared to South Korean websites on the right. We found this result even cooler than the overall colorfulness score, since not only was it statistically significant, but when scanning large numbers of websites, the difference in saturation is also visually apparent, as seen by the websites from Brazil and South Korea. Moving on to complexity, the perceived complexity model, like colorfulness, is another predictor for visual appeal. It is also measured on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being very simple and 10 being highly cluttered or complex. Here's an example of a website with high complexity on the left and low complexity on the right. Comparing the average complexity score, we again found statistically significant differences across countries. Top websites in India, for example, are on average less complex than those in Russia. You can see this difference here with an example of a website around the average visual complexity for India on the left, and the same for Russia on the right. You can see that the Indian website has less clutter compared to the Russian website. Now, like colorfulness, complexity is a compound metric, so several factors influence this score. One of the most observable factors for complexity is text prevalence, which measures how much area in a website is made up of text. Differences in text prevalence were again visually noticeable across countries. For example, on the left, sample websites from China show more text overall compared to Chilean websites on the right. And similar to saturation, we found these results in text prevalence particularly exciting, since it is visually apparent even when scanning large numbers of website screenshots. Now, so far, most of the results that we've been showing you focus on diversity. But you probably didn't recognize a lot of the sites in those screenshots. This is because the websites we have shown you so far have been locally popular websites. Locally popular means that they are popular within 1 or 2 countries only. On the other hand, globally popular websites, meaning popular across many or all of the 44 countries we looked at, didn't differ in any of the design metrics we explored. These global websites also tended to be some of the most popular in each country, meaning they were not just in the top 2,000 websites, but often in the top 100 websites for each country. This is really interesting since it suggests that although there exist design differences across countries, shown by the local website differences, lots of people may be primed by a homogeneous, global subset of very popular websites around the world. Now, Manuel will explain to you some of the design implications of that.
A popular topic in the design community is the trend towards website sameness. More and more clients seem to demand the same design solutions regardless of the business and their target audience. These example websites all serve very different purposes, yet they follow identical design approaches. Design similarity is prevalent among globally popular websites, as we found. The exposure to the design of frequently used websites may influence a client's decision to demand designs which look familiar. They might also be unaware of the difference between their own taste and the tastes of their target audience, which leaves out the potential of design adaptations. Our research has shown diversity exists across countries when looking at locally popular websites. This data can be used to inform and promote creative design solutions for targeted audiences. To apply this data, we built a tool to support designers in their localization efforts. Juxtapose enables you to compare website samples between different countries using our quantified design metrics. On this screenshot, we compare the average saturation of popular websites in the United States with those in South Korea. Juxtapose then shows an overview of screenshots which represent the average saturation score from each country. When comparing your website design to a similar website layout from South Korea provided by Juxtapose, you can see the subtle difference of less saturated colors. In order to blend into the regional design context, you could lower the saturation of the colors you use. Repeating this step with other metrics brings you closer to a localized version of your design. In summary, we found that the ability to quantify differences is useful for design localization because it will help you make decisions and it will let you know what to adjust when making those decisions. We further found that comparing large-scale samples of websites reveal diversity and similarity in design. A longitudinal study might tell us in which direction mainstream design is moving, more towards diversity or more towards the globally already established similarity. Our goal is to collect design snapshots over time and obtain data which allows us to define categories within our dataset. Regional diversity makes a case for design localization and promotes creativity in web design. Feel free to use our tool Juxtapose and explore our dataset, and we would like to thank you for your attention and open the floor for any questions.
Hi there. Thanks for this talk. I'm Judd Anton from Airbnb. Did you look at the statistical relationships between the terms that you derived, the quantitative terms? It's hard to eyeball, but it occurred to me that maybe there's an underlying factor which was responsible for how can you have a, let's say, is there a necessary relationship between text heaviness and complexity? What does a text heavy but non-complex site looks like? So would they be highly correlated? Did you check into that?
Well, it's unlikely to have a low complexity if you're very text heavy. It's a very strong factor in that model. That
did you look for correlations between the individual quantified factors that you pulled out?
Yeah, I think I can. So yeah, so complexity is a model that's made up of a bunch of different factors. One of those factors being text prevalence. So in that example, I don't know how much weight the model gives to text prevalence, but it's pretty high. So yes, that kind of gives you a sense of the correlation. We did not analyze this in this paper. Most of it was just based on prior work.
Thanks.
Hi, Anna Leparev, Waters Corporation. I was just curious, so you mentioned countries in isolation, but did you see patterns across countries, maybe given certain political situations, or maybe looking at patterns from past to present? Have you thought about that?
you can have it.
Okay. Yes, a little bit. So one of the really interesting things that we found was that you may have noticed that both China and Russia were in a fair amount of our comparisons. And when we looked at, for example, like how many global websites were in their top 100, we found much lower levels there than compared to other countries. So that was one example of like kind of political climates giving indication to why there are these design differences across countries. As far as like culturally similar countries, things like that, we found a little bit of it, but not like across. It wasn't consistent all the times.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Micha from Northeastern University. In the end, you were talking a little bit about looking at how an individual's website would compare to maybe similar website in a different country. Did you do any work on that personalized thing where maybe someone could just enter their own website and maybe compute these statistics for you and then say, well, if you wanted to be more local, then you should lower the saturation or something like that?
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting outlook to have, like a automated like software that gives you that feedback. And there are several other projects going into that direction. There's even now, like, I think it's called Ad Hoc. There's a an application coming out that tells you like how your imagery corresponds to certain demographics. So there's a lot going on, but so far there's no such tool that covers everything. But it's an interesting perspective, definitely, to have that feature.
Great, thanks.
Hello, thank you for your talk. So forgive me if this is in the paper, but I guess the thing that struck me most about like the comparison between India and Russia in particular was that the one in India really looked like a mobile-friendly site, whereas the other one didn't. Do you talk about this at all, like the prevalence of mobile use versus like computer use, and how that would affect the sort of design patterns between the countries?
So do you think in a country where it's like more common to use mobile devices.
Right, exactly.
The,
Yeah,
the design might be different on default.
Right, the developers might just bias towards wanting to have like a site with, you know, the big picture buttons that are mobile friendly versus the more text heavy, like smaller menu bars and things like that.
We did not handle this in that project, but that's an interesting aspect, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, fantastic talk. I'm Chelsea Myers from Drexel University. So I'm interested if your research has uncovered anything about how these local design trends reflect user preference. So for example, Brazil, you saw higher saturation, and well, in the United States right now, we have this brutalist trend, but I don't know if that's what the users prefer. So if anything in your research uncovered that these aren't just trends from the web designers in that area, but actually user preference we can cater to.
So there is prior research that investigated on a large scale how actually design preferences differ, and we did some comparison to the results from prior research in terms of like what is the preferred complexity or colorfulness score, but we couldn't like we couldn't move into that direction because it just didn't show up. So there were like high differences in the preferences from prior research, but we couldn't find such strong differences in how websites actually are designed. So you could conclude carefully that websites do not cater what people would actually like to see.
All right, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jen from CU Boulder, and so when you're talking about going through the different websites, you said you filtered out adult content, and I'm curious why you were doing this, and then how much of a percentage of that was that you did scrub out. Yeah.
Well, part of it was like self-protection, so when you look at statistical differences and then you want to know how that turns out in a visual effect, it's really not a great thing to look at all this content. Plus we wanted to present here and we thought it's more appropriate to filter that out.
So was it like more taboo, or I guess I'm just curious.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it was also more because this site was going to be open up and we were going to be pulling lots of screenshots and we weren't sure which ones were going to get pulled based around the average scores of the various metrics. We kind of wanted to filter on that end. And then, filtering it within the within the analyses themselves. We were trying to figure out, like, this is going off of your question a little bit, but I think you're thinking along the same lines and you can correct me if I'm wrong. We're interested in trying to see if categories of websites were going to show differences in the types of designs that they showed, in which case taking out adult content can kind of take out a large chunk of one category. We were not able to find that in this paper, although it's something that we are kind of interested in looking at in the future.
Thank you.
Hi, Rupa Patel. I work at GoDaddy. I have a question about, so you mentioned categories of websites. Mm-hmm. Did you look at how those categories are different, like if you tag those websites according to what kind of category they were, and in comparing them, like if business websites versus nonprofit or university websites? I mean, did you guys do that analysis?
We started obtaining categories, and then we were digging into the data and found quite quickly that after, let's say, like the top 500 websites from those countries, it gets very unreliable. Like there are shopping websites that are clearly not a shopping website, and so the declarations were just not matching, and we excluded that for this project because we just couldn't ensure that these categorical data is correct. But that is a future work we want to do and get like reliable categories, maybe even like prove them with like human feedback if that's really what the website is about, and then dig further into that dimension.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Beth, for speaking.